الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll pick up from where we had ended in the last lesson, where we had covered in some detail regarding Hadith al-Mu'allal. As the author rahimahullah, he mentioned, who's Ibn Mulakin rahimahullah, in this mukhtasar, in this brief risala relating to ilm al-mustalah. So we had covered concerning Hadith al-Mu'allal, as the author rahimahullah, he mentioned, and today inshallah ta'ala we will try to cover Hadith al-Muttarib and second Hadith Mudraj. So we'll try to cover those two now, as mentioned here by the author rahimahullah, regarding different mustalahat and also those rulings that apply, that relates to those particular types of hadith. So he mentioned here concerning what he covered next after mu'allal, he mentioned muttarib, the next type of hadith to be discussed. He mentioned here wal muttarib, the hadith of muttarib. What is defined as muttarib? He mentioned here huwa ma yurwa ala awjuin مختلفة متساوية. So he mentioned regarding the definition that of Hadith al-Muttarib, he mentioned هو ما يروى على أوجه, that the hadith that have been mentioned in different ways, hadith that have been narrated in different ways, مختلفة, and also there's a difference between them. There seem to be differences between these different narrations, متساوية, and also that they are all on equal standing, they are all on equal footing regarding the grading of those hadith. So hadith al-Muttarib, according to the author rahimahullah, are a hadith that have been narrated in different ways, but there are differences between those different narrations, and also all those hadith, they are of the same grading. So all of them are somewhat maqbool. So how does one try to resolve this matter? So they mention concerning, so that's concerning matters concerning Hadith al-Muttarib. So that hadith, those type of hadith that are of that description, they are referred to as Muttarib. So regarding, as we will normally mention regarding some more detail, a little more detail regarding what is said overall regarding Muttarib, as what the author mentioned is somewhat mukhtasar, but give a general meaning of what is intended by Hadith al-Muttarib. So regarding concerning Hadith al-Muttarib, that the ulama that they have mentioned regarding concerning that what is meant by regarding concerning Hadith Mukhtarib, that concern they mentioned that this type of hadith, as they mention, huwa hadith alladhi yarwa, they mention concerning the hadith al-Muttarib, as they mention concerning huwa al-hadith. You have different definition that are given, regarding hadith al-Muttarib, where they mention that huwa ma ruwiya ala awjwin adidatin mutasawiyatin في قوة يتعذر الجمع بينها أو ترجيح. So one of the more of those definitions that are mentioned regarding Hadith al-Muttarib, that are more detailed, that mention is the hadith ما روي على أوجه, where hadith have been mentioned عديدة, hadith have been mentioned by many ways, متساوية في القوة, and all those hadith that they are of the same grading, their hadith are said to be maqbool, acceptable. So all those hadith are authentic, but within those hadith, there are differences. يتأذر الجم, where it becomes difficult for one to reconcile those hadith. Though those differences are unable, they are unable to reconcile those differences بينها, between these hadith. أو ترجيح, or one cannot make a tarjih as to which to accept and which to reject. So those hadith, because of that conflict that occur between all those hadith, then they are rejected. Because there's differences that one cannot resolve or reconcile between those hadith. So those hadith, because of that differences, and one is unable to say which one should accept and which one to reject, then they're said to be hadith muttarib, because of the level of conflict that occur between them, and one is unable to make a tarjiyah, to make a decision as to which to accept and which not to accept. So all are dismissed. So that's concerning Hadith al-Muttarib in that particular meaning. So I mentioned you have different definition, but the definition there revolves around that particular meaning. So concerning Hadith al-Muttarib, that they mention regarding of those points regarding concern hadith al-muttarib, that of those things that are involved, as we mentioned, that at times among the ulama of concern that the ulama also have laid down, second, what they refer to as shurut, or they mention concern shurut hadith al-muttarib. So in a condition that if they are that they are met, then the hadith is classed as muttarib. Those condition they mention are three things. So hadith that are classed to be muttarib, that there's this conflict between those hadith. If these hadith, they fulfill these criteria, these condition, they are classed as muttarib. One, they mention istiwa wujul al-ikhtilaf. That is hadith, these hadith, that there's many hadith among the same topic, the same hadith, but they seem to have differences between themselves. So there's difference between those hadiths, as there's a sense of conflict between those hadiths. Second, which is the same hadith on the same topic. So those hadith are about a particular hadith that has been narrated on a particular topic, but you have some of additional subtraction, but it seems to be one saying that this thing is halal and one saying the hadith is this thing is haram. So it seems to be a conflict on that particular subject. So they mention that those hadith, it comes different ways, some saying this and some saying something contrary, in the sense of that type of ikhtilaf. So it's many narrations, but they seem to having a conflict between themselves. The second, mal istiwa, and yata'adhar, that also it is ta'adhar al-jam, where the person is unable also how to reconcile between these hadiths. So one is unable to come to from a final conclusion regarding deciding which to accept and which not to accept. So it becomes somewhat difficult, difficult for one to reconcile between unifying these hadiths and coming to a final conclusion. Now, so the other condition based upon the qawaid of ilm al-hadith. It becomes difficult for one to reconcile between these hadith. That's of the other condition regarding hadith al-muttarib. And the third that I mentioned, jamil al-wujud, al-mukhtalifa mutasawi fi quwwa, that all those different narration, that they are all they are on equal footing regarding the ruling on those hadith. So all those hadith regarding their grading, their hadith, either for example the hadith al-maqbul, all these hadith are said to be hadith which are acceptable. So all these hadith are said to be graded as hadith either sahih, nam, or they are all graded to be hadith al-hasan. So one is unable to make a tarjih, make a decision regarding accepting some because some are more stronger than the others. All are on the same footing regarding strength or acceptability. At some point, a person might make so all are on the same footing regarding the grading of that hadith, of those hadiths. At times, some of the ulama might come to a conclusion or make a tarjih, choose some over the others based upon some of those hadith may be hadith sahih on the highest level and some may be hadith da'if. So you said based upon this we accept those of the sahih over those of al-husn. So that's of ways that but they have to find a way to see a valid reason for them to give precedent to some of those over others. And if one is unable to give a valid reason based upon the principle of hadith, based upon the qawaid and the rules of hadith and its science, if one is unable to make this conclusion of giving precedent to some of those narration over the others, and all of them are on the same footing, then they said that hadith is said to be muttarib. And that is the final, and so a reason to dismiss those hadith. Or the ones that are dismissed are said to be muttarib. So that's concerning hadith, al-muttarib, and the condition, the criteria of muttarib. Another matter, something the ulama they mentioned, is that concern that at times the ulama of qadim, of old, regarding hadith, they may say sometimes that are said to be muttarib, but they were able to dismiss some and accept some, but they will still call those hadith muttarib, even though at the end they came to a final conclusion. So that's of the ulama of old. The ones of latter times after, if they are unable to come to any conclusion, then they are all called muttarib, because they were unable to make a tarjih. So that's concerning that matter. This hadith is sometimes you find that of the ulama who have dealt with hadith of this time. They mention Imam Bukhari, At-Timithi, Abu Hatim Al-Razi, al-Uqayli wa Daraqutni. So they have sometime of dealt with hadith of that type and of that discussion regarding hadith that are said to be muttarib, and others of the ulama. Also, with hadith al-muttarib, it's also related to what we had discussed previously in the last lesson regarding hadith al-mu'all. Hadith al-mu'alla, or hadith al-mu'all, or hadith al-ma'lul, in the sense of hadith that are said to be hadith al-mu'alla, that this category of this type of hadith, hadith al-muttarib, it's a branch from hadith al-mu'all. Nam, so it stems from it, so it is under what is called hadith al-mu'all, of the different types of hadith al-mu'all, that some of those hadith is because of ittirab, or hadith al-muttarib, because of that conflict that one is unable to resolved, then the hadith is said to be muttarib and is a form of illah. It becomes an illah where the hadith seen from what is there seems apparent to be okay, but there's a form of conflict where some are contradicting each other, but all are generally authentic, all are acceptable. That's concerning hadith al-ittirab, or hadith muttarib. They mention regarding that hadith al-muttarib that you'll find that in most cases that they'll occur regarding hadith that are said to be marfu'. So hadith that are said to be marfu', meaning hadith that goes back to the Prophet of Islam, then you find that ittirab occur more so in that area regarding hadith that are classed to be muttarib, even though it does occur regarding some of the athar of the Sahaba and others. So you might find sometimes ittirab between certain narration and a particular Sahabi regarding al-athar, but it mainly occur regarding hadith al-marfu', that they occur mainly regarding hadith al-marfu', more so over that of athar al-mawquf. With hadith al-mu'tarib, we mentioned that it is a description regarding certain hadith. Not necessarily regarding, so regarding concern the was of the general hadith, a general description of the hadith, that it is ittirab, that are muttarib. And this, in most cases, that it occurs between rawat who are said to be thiqat. So this type of ittirab, or hadith al-muttarib, it has mentioned that tasawi fil quwwa, that all the hadith, that they are somewhat on equal par, on equal footing regarding their level of strength. So this normally occurs, so a conflict, it occurs between those who are thiqat. One saying this is this, and the other saying opposite. So, and from people who are all equally thiqat. So if it's a case regarding one person who is thiqa is saying something, and the one who's saying something in opposition to him is someone who's da'if, then it's easily dismissed because that person is weak, so what he's saying, it has no bearing. But if the person's involved, they're all thiqat, then that's when the conflict becomes more intense. So it usually occurs between people who are said to be al-thiqat, and this is our concern. It becomes more difficult to make that tarjih and to come to that final conclusion. The next matter regarding hadith al-muttarib that I mentioned concerning hukum hadith al-muttarib. So hadith al-muttarib that I mentioned that is considered to be of those aqsam al-hadith da'if. So when I mention hadith al-muttarib, then this is indicating that this hadith is weak, based upon the reason that we have mentioned, that there's a khilaf between the narrator regarding the hadith. There are many hadith on the same topic, but they seem to be conflicting with each others, and also all on an equal footing regarding their authenticity, where one is unable to come to a final conclusion and how to reconcile between them. So those hadith that they are dismissed and said to be muttarib. So it is one of the category of hadith that are said to be classed as da'if. And the reason, because adam al-dabt, that al-rawat, where some of those narrators were unable to be precise regarding narrating that hadith. So precision, so they were not as precise regarding their narration of this hadith. And some error have occurred. So that's concerning hadith al-muttarib. And as we mentioned, for hadith to be authentic, that the dabt is in place and is correct. So that's concerning hadith al-muttarib. And finally, regarding hadith al-muttarib, hadith al-ittirab, that I mentioned that it occurs, or two matters regarding that. Where does it occur in hadith? That al-ittirab, it occurs in the matan and also in the isnad. So at times that occur regarding Ataratan fil in the isnad, regarding the narrators, there's some errors, that they make some errors regarding this narrator, that person, was it this person, that person? So an error that was unable to be resolved between the narrators, one saying this person, he's saying that person. So it occurs in the isnad, and that will occur most often. It occurs most often in the area of the isnad, but also it occurred regarding al-matan, which is to a lesser degree. So it does occur regarding the matan of the hadith, and lastly regarding hadith al-muttarib, that works or books related to this particular topic in specific. Are there works of the ulama that covers this topic? Yes. So you find concerning Ibn Hajar rahimullah that he wrote a book on this topic. They said the book is missing, which the book is called Muqtarib fi Bayan Muttarib. Muqtarib fi Bayan Muttarib. The Hafid Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. And also that book is considered to be mafqud, or not known, or yet discovered or found. Another book of contemporary is a book that's of the same name, Muqtarib fi Hadith, or Bayan Muttarib, by one of the researchers, who is Ahmed Bazmul. So Ahmed Bazmul, one of the in his thesis, wrote in this book, which is Muqtarib fi Bayan Hadith Muttarib, that of the ulama of contemporary or mashaykh of contemporary who have written on that particular topic, or researchers who have written on that topic. So that's concerning hadith al-muttarib, as mentioned by the author. The second type of hadith that he mentioned is concerning wal-mudraj. So we'll be going on to the next category of hadith that is mentioned here, which is hadith al-mudraj. So he mentioned al-mudraj. What is it as he defined here? Huwa ziyadatun taqa fil matan min rawi bila fasl aw nahu wa nahwi. So he mentioned regarding concerning that mudraj, he mentioned huwa ziyadatun taqa fil matan. So the explanation he gave concerning what he defines, Ibn Mulakin Rahimah in his book At-Tadhkira fil Ulum al-Hadith, he discussed concerning what is hadith al-mudraj. He mentioned is defined as huwa ziyadatun taqa fil matan. It's additional information mentioned in the matan, in the text of the hadith. Min rawi, from by way of the narrator, bila fasl, without him making any clarity on this, or making this matter, clarifying this matter. Wa nahwi, or nahwi, meaning concerning, and other than this meaning concerning, that will be taken concerning, that it occur also in the sanad. So it occurs in the matan and sanad. So we'll discuss concerning a little more discussion relating to this matter regarding hadith mudraj. So we're discussing concerning hadith al-mudraj. So hadith al-mudraj, lugatan, they mention hadith al-mudraj, man adraja, meaning concerning adraja shay fi shay, where someone can somewhat you have put something with others. So al-mudraj idkhal. So in general concerning mudraj, which is madkhal, is concerning madkhal or idraj, where you're placing something into something, putting something with something. So that's concerning that matter regarding linguistic meaning of mudraj. As for the meaning of mudraj, istilahan, according to the ulama of hadith, that they mentioned that of those definitions that is mentioned, and we mentioned that, so after the definition that are given, that you find several definitions that are somewhat very similar, but of those definitions that are mentioned, which is huwa al-hadith alladhi yu'raf anna fi sanadihi aw matnihi ziyada laysa min. So they mentioned that concerning what is mudraj, of those definitions that are mentioned by some of the ulama, that is a hadith that become known that there's been an additional mentioned in the isnad and in the matan, in the chain and in the text, without making a distinction. And it mentions, so that's concerning the general definition. So that's concerning what is said to be mudraj, where one of the narrators have added information to the hadith, whether by way of relating to the isnad or by way of the matan. So at the end, he did not clarify this. He did not clarify this. So that's concerning what is mudraj. And also with mudraj, where the person who is the listener is unable to make that distinction. So the person who hears or read the hadith, you think all that is mentioned there is a part of the hadith. But in actual fact and reality, part of that statement is the hadith, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, and part of it is statements of one of the narrators. That is not actually a part of the hadith, but the person may believe that all mention is actually a part of the hadith. That's concerning mudraj. And mudraj, again, is of those a branch of mu'allal, hadith al-mu'alla. So which is, everything seems to be okay, but the reality, that's not the case. Where aspect of the hadith is not actually going back to the Prophet of Islam, but actually a statement of other individuals, of the narrators. But they didn't clarify, make a distinction between their statement and that of the Prophet of Islam. So that's concerning, in brief, what is said to be hadith mudraj. So again, statements that have been mentioned in the hadith by way of the narrator, but a person may believe it is a part of the statement of the Prophet of Islam, or something that's a part of the isnad, but actually it is not. That's concerning mudraj. So regarding concerning hadith al-mudraj, or idraj, as sometimes mentioned, that it have aqsam. So you have different aqsam, different categories regarding mudraj. That it occurs concern that mudraj is of two qism, is of two categories. Category that relates to the isnad, and a category or section that relates to the matan. So idraj, it occurs in the matan, the text of the hadith, and second, it occurs in relation to the isnad, the chain of the narrators. So that's concerning in general. As for now, breaking down that matter, so as for first, isnad, mudraj relating to the isnad. So mudraj in context of the isnad, in relation to the isnad. As for this, they define concerning huwa ma ghayyarat siyaq isnadi. So they mention that what is meant where the isnad, there's a change have occurred in the isnad sequence. So a change have occurred in the sequence of the isnad. That's generally concerning what is meant. So a change that have occurred in the isnad. Example. I want to give an example regarding mudraj that occurs in the isnad. There's a surah or case regarding, we mentioned concerning a case, ma rawahu, what's been narrated and Thabit ibn Musa. So it's narrated and Thabit ibn Musa, al-Zahid, and Sharik al-Naqai. So Thabit ibn Musa and Sharik al-Naqai and Amash and Abi Sufyan and Jabir radiyallahu anhu أن النبي الإسلام قال من كثرت صلاته بالليل حسن وجهه بالنهار. And this hadith in the Ibn Majah. So again, regarding this hadith that is in the Ibn Majah, that about Isnad and Thabit ibn Musa al-Zahid an Sharik al-Naqai an Amash an Abi Sufyan an Jabir. Upon the Prophet Islam, that he is supposed to have said, Man kathurat salatu bil-layl, the one who prays regularly at nights, then his face will be bright. He will have a bright face during the day, or you have a pleasant face during the day. And that's the hadith. So on this matter, they mentioned that this hadith mentioned that on this matter we find concerning that the situation of this hadith was that Sharik, that he mentioned this isnad. So he entered upon Thabit in a majlis. So Sharik was in a majlis narrating. So Thabit ibn Musa arrived in that sitting. So when Sharik was speaking and narrating hadith, when Thabit ibn Musa arrived, Zahid, and Sharik, who was the teacher, he saw him. He said he was narrating the hadith with the isnad, as mentioned. He was narrating a hadith, and he mentioned the isnad. So when he saw Sharik entered, because Sharik was known to be a person of Zahid and a person who prays at night, then he said Sharik, he said towards Thabit, he said to him, Man kathrat salatuhu bil-layl. So he meant this statement as a praise for Thabit. So Sharik wanted to praise Thabit. So he mentioned his statement that the one who prays a lot during the night, then his face will be bright, beautiful during the day. But Sharik thought this to be an hadith. Thabit, he thought this to be the hadith. But actually it was a statement of praise for him, not per se a hadith. So he made that idraj. So he placed that isnad that he heard on this hadith, but both are separate things. So that's concerning idraj regarding isnad, where isnad was put on a hadith that they have no relation to. So that statement of Sharik was a statement, not a hadith, his own statement in praise of Thabit, but Thabit, he took it to be a hadith with that isnad, because he heard the isnad, so he automatically connect that isnad to that hadith, because they were said in the same breath or close to each other. That's concerning isnad, one example. A second, the second qism, category of idraj or mudraj, is regarding to the matan, in relation to the matan. So regarding concern to the matan, that where in the text of a hadith, where sometimes things are added, statements are added by the narrators to the hadith text itself that is not initially or originally a part of it, and actually not a part of the hadith. So you have statements that are mentioned that are of the Prophet Islam, but also things that are added that are statements of others, whether by way of the Sahabi or someone other than him, another of the narrator. But a person might perceive and believe that all that is mentioned is actually a part of the hadith, but that's not the case. Examples of those, and that's concerning mudraj, regarding way of the matan, by way of the text, and this occur more often. And regarding concerning mudraj, regarding the actual text of the hadith, we said that this occurs more often, and we might find that either it occurred at times at the beginning of the isnad or beginning of the text. An example of that concern they mentioned regarding concerning. So beginning concerning that, it occurs at times at the beginning, at times in the middle of the hadith, and at times at the end of the hadith. And it occurs concerning at the beginning of the hadith, nadir, not often. Also in the middle of the hadith, not much. And also more frequent, it occurs at the end of the hadith. We find things that are added at the end of the hadith that is actually not a part of the hadith. So example regarding mudraj generally concerned that occurs in a hadith, that occurs or mentioned a hadith that's a hadith that's narrated in the Bukhari and Muslim. Parts of the hadith. Then with this hadith is a hadith that it is narrated on Abu Hurairah anhu, marfuhan, going back to the Prophet of Islam, where it says, Asbighu al-wudu. Perfect, do be complete in performing wudu. Waylun lil-aqab min an-nar. Asbighu al-wudu. Waylun lil-aqab min an-nar. So that's the hadith. So this hadith, in some of the books, you go to Bulugh al-Maram, it will be mentioned there. But this hadith, a part of it is a statement of the Prophet of Islam, and part of it is a statement of Abu Hurairah. And not everything mentioned is actually the full hadith. So they mentioned regarding the part where it says, so it is a statement regarding that I mentioned that was mentioned by Abu Hurairah anhu, where that Abu Hurairah anhu, that the part that says Asbighu al-wudu, that the statement of Abu Hurairah. And the part that says Waylun lil aqab min an-nar is the statement of the Prophet alayhi salam. So this hadith in other narration clarified that Abu Hurairah who saw well they want to clarify the people and clarify the hukum that one should be perform wudu complete where all the parts are washed. He was saying to the people regarding that, he was informing them, asbigul wudu, ensure that your wudu is done complete. Why? Then he mentioned the reason why. Then he mentioned that the Prophet says, waylul aqab min an-nar, because you should be mindful of your eels in the hellfire if you didn't perform your wudu properly. But some narrators thought that everything was one. So they include the statement of Abu Hurairah and that of the statement of the Prophet of Islam as one thing, but in actual fact, they're not. They're to be separated. So that's concerning cases such as those. Those are statements. So, al-idraj is where the statement of others are included. And in that case, that's sometimes the statement of Sahabi that may also occur. Also, that you might find a hadith that is narrated and Busra bint Safwan. Busra bint Safwan. Marfuhan, meaning that it goes back to the Prophet of Islam. And this hadith it mentioned concerning, that it mentioned, Man massa ذكره أو أنثيي فليتوضأ. Al-Hadith. So this hadith it mentioned, Man massa ذكره, the one who touches his private parts. أو أنثيي, or أنثيي meaning concerning his testicles. Nam is testicles. فليتوضأ, then he should perform wudu. But this hadith, a part of it where it mentioned Man massa ذكره, that's the statement of the Prophet of Islam. The part that mentioned أنثيي فليتوضأ, that's not from the hadith itself. That's the statement of someone who has been included in the hadith. So a person might read the hadith and think that all of that is a part of the hadith, and believe that so from this, some may conclude that if one touches one testicles for a man, then his wudu is broken. Because this hadith states this, but actually that part of the hadith is not actually a part of the hadith. It's a statement that has been included, but actually not from the statement or from the mouth of the Prophet of Islam on this matter. So the Nabi alayhi salam did not say it. That statement actually came from someone else. But, so that's concerning, and those things, it kind of somewhat wasn't these things regarding al-mudraj occur regarding matters concerning fiqh-related matters. It can have a severe impact on matters regarding fiqh-related or rules that are extracted. So that's concerning example regarding those matters. So the part that's said to be so, that's concerning idraj or mudraj. I mentioned it occurs in the matan more often, at times in the beginning, the times in the middle, and at times at the end. But the person have to be, but is being able to make that distinction as to when it occurs, and that's kind of the rule of the ulama and those who specialize in this field. Asbab, next, asbab al-idraj or mudraj. What's the reason why idraj or mudraj occurs? The reason why this occur. They mention that after more common reason why this sometimes occurs by some narrators, that narrator, that is intention, that he wants to make a clarity in clarifying a hukum that relates to an hadith. So first he gives the hukum, then he wants to mention the hadith as his proof. But the people combine between both. Regarding his statement that trying to him clarifying the hukum, and him mention the evidence for why he came to that conclusion. They took all as one. But there's two separate things. His hukum and that of the hadith itself. So we've mentioned that at times, that the intention of why this occurs, that the narrator intend to clarify the hukum, then mention the dalil, but some take both as one. So that's concerning that matter. As we mentioned concerning the case concerning Abu Hurairah and who he mentioned, asbigul wudu. He wants to clarify the hukum. Then he mentioned the hadith, but then they took all as one. Also, it occurs at times regarding concerning that the narrator of reason why. Sometimes the second reason also, that the cost from the word tafsir kalimat al-gharib. So kalimat al-ghariba, where sometimes you may find a word that is somewhat strange or difficult words. Ghariba, kalimat al-ghariba, meaning the word may be difficult, not a common word that they use, but is where people may not understand what is meant by this word. So the narrator wished to clarify the meaning of that word. So they kind of somewhat, so it is included, so it is mentioned. And you find, for example, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, when she went concerns the Prophet, we mentioned that, the hadith of Hira, that Islam go to the Mount of Hira, that she wanted to mention Yuhannith. So they mentioned Ta'abbud. So kind of somewhat, they mentioned regarding concern the hadith, they mentioned that, hadith of Al-Bidi al-Wahi, regarding the start of what they mentioned, Kana Nabi Islam yakhlu bil-Ghar al-Hira, that Islam would seclude himself in the cave of Hira. Then it mentioned yatahannat fiha, and that he would yatahannat fiha. Tahannat they mentioned wa huwa yata'abbud, and that's the meaning of yatahannath, that he would perform acts of worship. So yata'abbud is not from the original hadith, but word that was included to clarify what was meant by yatahannath. So the narrator mentioned a form of to define the word yatahannath by mentioning وَهُوَ يَتَعَبُّد. So that sometimes it comes by way of trying to clarify a word which is strange that occurs in the hadith. So those are the reason behind idraj at times. That one which to clarify a hukum, and at times also to clarify a word which is strange in the hadith. Next in line regarding this matter is regarding hukum hadith al-mudraj. Hadith al-mudraj. What's the hukum regarding hadith mudraj? Regarding the ulama, they clarify regarding hadith al-mudraj that is to kind of somewhat, they mention that one, the ulama are that yakhtalif al-hukum. Regarding the hukum, regarding hadith al-mudraj, that the hukum, it varies depending on the situation and the circumstance. So you might find that depending on the hal of the rawi and the circumstance. So they mention that idraj, that if it occurs by the rawi, by way of an error that was not intended, غير متعمد, he was not intended, but he made an error, then la haraj can be clarified and no problem. The hadith will still be authentic. And that will be thus mentioned as an error that occurred by way of the narrator. Nam, and it would not, but if this repeatedly occur by the same person, then that can affect his dabt. A one-off few occasion, but when it comes to something which is repeatedly done, then that will affect that person level of dabt. But generally, these few cases that occur, then consider to be an error, but it doesn't per se affect the narrator much, nor the general overall authenticity of the hadith if it occurs regarding in the matan. Just be clarified that as mudraj. Then also idraj also occur concerning that other cases concern that amdan, when it is done intentionally. So in case it was done unintentionally, but case where the person does it intentionally. In those cases concerning it intentionally, that they mention that either if the person's intention is to clarify a word which is strange, then that is labas, as the ulama mentioned. Then there's no harm in this. There's no harm. The person's intention was to clarify a word which is difficult, but the person should have they should have made sure that that's made clear. So they should have clarified that matter. A second situation may be that so there's no so that case is much more easygoing to ulama in that case, and that is not considered something haram that have taken place. But better that he should have clarified what he has done. Second scenario concerns to know that the person did it, and the intention is not to clarify a kalimat. So what's kind of somewhat it occurs where there's kind of imham, so what's kind of somewhat to kind of somewhat may give was left. In that case, may concern idraj, where so something is haram that have been done. So at times it may be a case where the person intentionally did it without making clarity, and may give a false pretense that is a part of the hadith. Then this is something which is haram. This is haram to be done. But because of the preciseness of the ulama of hadith, that in normal cases they're able to detect hadith which is mudraj. Those who are specialized in that. So they will clarify, but what that person may have done and didn't clarify his case and intentionally did it, then they may mention that what he have done is haram upon him, but it would have been detected and sieved out from the hadith and dissected from the hadith. Mudraj at times occur with some of the Sahaba to clarify certain hukum or clarify some maybe difficult words, and also others for that same two reasons. that idraj will occur in most cases to clarify something which is a wording which is difficult, or by way of a hukum, but some way it kind of somewhat entered, was taken by others as being a part of the hadith. As for al-idraj, how to identify mudraj. The ulama of the tools that they use that one, they use 4 of the tools that are used at one. We give some that by collecting the hadith, or the narration of the hadith. And they will clarify each other type of thing. At times it may be that person, one of the ulama, the great ulama of hadith, they might detect it by their study and also going through the hadith in preciseness. They will detect it and clarify this. At times maybe the narrator himself might clarify what is the hadith and what is his statements. So at times the person himself may clarify, this is the narrator himself. And also another way is detecting of idraj, mudraj, is by those wordings in the hadith. Those words are somewhat far-fetched that the Prophet of Islam will say these words or use this type of language. So that's ways of detecting idraj in the hadith. And finally, regarding books on this topic. So regarding concerning books on this topic, that of books of the ulama of old, you have concerning Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, I've written a book specifically on idraj by showing cases of these. And that book is in print. And that book is called Al-Fasl lil-Wasl al-Mudraj fil-Naql. And that book is in print by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah. So the book Al-Fasl lil-Wasl al-Mudraj fi-Naql. So that's concerning the book of Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah. Also, As-Sayuti also have a book, Al-Mudraj ila al-Mudraj, or above that title. So also Sayuti have a book of that title. And also others have, such as Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and also that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also have done like a Al-Muqtasar of the book of Baghdadi, of Khatib al-Baghdadi. As we mentioned, Khatib al-Baghdadi have many works regarding Ilm al-Hadith. So in this particular topic, you have a book specifically on this topic of Mudraj. And also Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also have mentioned that, I've summarized the book with some additions. So, and the change the tartib. So Ibn Hajar worked around the books of Khatib al-Baghdadi with some addition. And also books that have been written by some of the contemporaries that in a different manner. So you have this book, that's one of the contemporaries that have written a book they call the general meaning concerning Al-Fadh al-Mudraja fi Ahadith al-Kutub al-Sitta, until the end of the book. And I mentioned وأثر ذلك في اختلاف الفقهاء أئمة الأربعة. So this دراسة الحديثية فقهية. So this book man consider al-Afad, wordings mudraja, or sentence that are mudraj, or words that are mudraj in a hadith al-Kutub al-Sitta, within Kutub al-Sitta. So he specific did a research regarding a hadith with our mudraj within Kutub al-Sitta. And Kutub al-Sitta, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah. Those are Kutub al-Sitta. So did some work on those specific books, and also to identify a hadith that are mudraj in those 6 books. And also added to this, he discussed وَأَثَرْ ذَلِكَ في اختلاف الفقهاء, and also the impact that it adds on the ruling of amongst the fuqaha, the difference between the fuqaha. As sometimes one of those who are writing fiqh may use a hadith to come to a conclusion that the hadith actually is mudraj. But they may not be aware of this. But their ruling is based upon a hadith which is mudraj. So you do find those cases that occur. So that's concerning that matter. So that inshallah ta'ala will be the end of this discussion. And this book, he wrote the book where it is done upon Abu al-Fiqhiyya. So discuss concerning a hadith that are mudraj regarding tahara. Then things of salat, bab of siyam, bab of hajj, bab of nikah, in different areas as outlined in the books. So in that system, so very useful book. So this is a very useful book on that particular topic. Very useful book regarding that particular topic. So this inshallah ta'ala will come to an end. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذا السبيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.